You're welcome to sit. If you want, we're going to spend here a while. Welcome to Masada.
Here, let me
Who's here for the first time? Who's the first timer here? The story of Masada is made of two stories, and this is something which I want to clarify as we start. We're talking about two stories. One story takes place on the year 30 BCE, whenever Masada is built by the king of the Jews, Herod. The second story takes place on the year 70 AD, when the last fighters of the Jews find shelter on top of Masada, and the Romans coming to get them. These are two different stories. In between the two stories, there's 100 years. And this is something which must be clear. I want to make sure that you really understand that we're talking about two periods, two stories. In order to get these two stories, we have to figure out the two most important questions about Masada, which is, who's the enemy? Who is the enemy that such a fortress would be built for? When I look outside, what I see is desert. Who's the enemy? Who would put here such an enormous resources to build such kind of fortress while I don't see any enemy? Which means Herod, who built Masada, was trying to get what? Who's the enemy he was trying to protect himself from? This is one question. Second question is about the Romans. 1,000 Jews on top of Masada on the year 70. The Romans took over the land, destroyed the temple, exiled the people. Why would the Romans care? And would come here for 3 years, for 1,000 people. The Romans were occupying here 80,000 Roman soldiers for 3 years, for 1,000 people. What kind of sense it makes? These are the two questions of Masada which we need to figure out. Once we figured them out, we have the story of Masada. If we did not, we don't. We are in a cistern. On top of Masada, we have over 30 cisterns from this kind. Some of them are twice and even triple in size. We're speaking of a huge amount of water that was stored here on top of Masada for the palace King Herod built on top of the mountain. Such kind of water system, I don't think we ever found in any complex anywhere in the world. One mountain which contained so much water, we don't have such kind of example. Take a look at the line of the water that used to be here. You can see the line of the water, which means this place used to be filled up with water at a certain point of time, and the question where the water come from. Because the amount of rain we have here is less than 1 inch a year, while there's no other sources of water. So this is another question we have to deal with. However, this is a cistern which was built by King Herod in order to supply his palace with water. So let's get to the first question. Who's the enemy Herod is trying to protect himself from? In order to get the story of Masada, we need to hear the story of Herod. Herod is the king of the Jews. Now, Herod is not Jewish. How somebody which is not Jewish become the king of the Jews? This is something which doesn't make a lot of sense. And in order to understand this story, we have to go back to the time of the Hashmonaim. During the time of the Second Temple, there was a dynasty of kings which was known as the Hashmonaim. And in a certain point of time, the Hashmonaim were fighting each other in order to have the crown, in order to rule Israel. And one day, these two sons of the king of Israel that just died, who once again fighting over the crown. In a certain point they say to each other, why don't we go to the Caesar in Rome and let him judge between us? So they go to Rome, and each one of them explained to the king why he should be the king in Yehuda. Caesar in Rome looks at them and say, Aristobulus, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be the king of Yehuda. And you, Hyrcanus, you ain't going to be the king of Yehuda either. So they're asking, so who's going to be the king? And he says, I think I know somebody better than both of you. Who? A guy, his name is Antipatris. Antipatris. Who's Antipatris? Antipatris is an Edomian. Edomian was a nation which was living across the Dead Sea. He was a very, very wealthy man. When I say wealthy, it's a kind of understatement. He was so wealthy that he could afford sending precious gifts to leaders in the world just like that. I have so much I can share. So the Caesar says, this kind of gifts which Antipatris sent me convinced me he's my man. He's going to be the king in Yehuda, and he sends a letter to Antipatris saying to him, Shalom Antipatris, from next week you're the king of Yehuda. Antipatris looks like a smart guy who says, why do I need this headache, be the king of the Jews? This is not such fun. And he takes the land of Yehuda and divides it between his sons, which are Agrippas, Patzael, and Herod. Herod, which is the most ambitious among his brothers, conquers, bribe, buys, in many different ways. Eventually he becomes the king of the Jews. Once he becomes the king of the Jews, somebody came to him and said, the Jews will never accept you because you're not from the dynasty of David. So Herod said, I know I'm not from the dynasty of David, but if I marry a woman from the dynasty of David, my son will be from the dynasty of David. So he's marrying Miriam from the dynasty of David. Yeah? And he's having 2 sons from her, hoping like his problems are solved. At the same very time, he's doing the best he can in order to improve the economy of Israel. He built here beautiful cities. He really is doing whatever he can. He does a lot in order to improve the economy of Israel. But the Jews hate him. The Jews hate him. And the question is why? And the answer is very simple. Herod is a Roman culture product. For him, adultery, paganism, and bloodshed is natural. And it's something which the Jews cannot accept. So the Jews actually revolt him 3 times. In one of these times, he almost got killed. When he noticed that the Jews are not going to accept him, he says, okay, fine. I tried to be nice to you. It didn't work. So now I'm going to be bad. He goes to Europe and he buys an army. fortress. He buys an army. He brings this army here to Israel, and he conquers city after city, village after village. Whoever was against him is killed, his possession is taken to the king. And wherever he is, he builds a fortress to defend his life. From this point on, he wouldn't take any risks. And the most powerful fortress he built is here on top of Masada, saying that if the Jews will push me to the wall, I'll be able to spend the rest of my life on top of Masada in a very comfortable way. So Masada is built as a fortress and as a palace. Very comfortable palace. That's what made Herod build Masada.
So he was afraid of the Jews.
He was terrified.
Terrified of the Jews.
Terrified by the Jews.
And he built his palace.
You may say that Herod was a miserable man, because he constantly surrounded himself with Gentiles, armed Gentiles, which would not allow any Jews to come close to him because he wouldn't trust the Jews whatsoever. At the very end of his life, 65 years old, about to die, very, very sick, enormously strong and wealthy. There's one thing that kills him, knowing that the Jews are going to celebrate his death. Knowing that the Jews are going to party his death. And he thinks to himself, what do you do in order to make the Jews mourn when I die? And he comes to a vicious idea. He ordered to bring him 450 from the greatest rabbis of Israel. And when he died, to kill him. And this way make the Jews mourn his death. Eventually it didn't happen. The funeral which he organized himself is the biggest the world ever knew. 60,000 people carrying a golden coffin. He was in, which basically made the journey from Jericho to Jerusalem. And from Jerusalem, after a very big ceremony at the temple, down to a mountain, he built himself as a mausoleum, a place to be buried. Herod Yon. Such kind of funeral the world never knew. Never knew. Under any condition, any circumstances, there was nothing like this. This is Herod. This is the man who built this fortress. And now we're going to go up to the top of the mountain to see the facilities he built on top of the mountain.